Hi, in this video we're going to be talking about the first of the three major divisions in the Old Testament, and we're going to be talking about the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books. The first 5 books of the Old Testament are called the Pentateuch, which simply means for 5 books, or sometimes they're called the books of Moses, because Moses is a major character throughout at least 4 of these 5 books. The traditional explanation is that Moses had responsibility for writing these books, but from very early on that idea began to be called into question. And now in most areas of biblical scholarship, the idea that Moses wrote the Pentateuch has been largely abandoned in favor of various theories of the composition of the Pentateuch. The most famous of these goes back to a German scholar by the name of Julius Wellhausen, who suggested that there were 4 main sources or complexes of tradition that came together that were talked about God in different ways, and they talked about the various characters in the first 5 books in slightly different ways. But scholarship now is turning back towards seeing the first 5 books as a unity, and certainly they have a significant thematic unity. They begin with the beginning, with the creation of everything, and in the beginning we find God. God is the principal character in all of these stories, and it goes through all the way to just before the children of Israel go into the promised land that God has sworn to give them as an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey, a good land, and all of these things. The movement of the first 5 books, or the Pentateuch, so it starts out at a wide angle, kind of like this, an angle as big as the world, and it narrows down to the story of one man, Father Abraham with his many sons. And then goes from there, this story of this one family, and expands again out into the story of the entire nation. The first 5 books of the Old Testament are often also called the Law. This is a translation of the Hebrew word Torah, which, well, it's not the best translation, but there are a lot of laws in this. In the first 5 books, there's actually 613 laws in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, but that's not all there is. There's plenty of stories, legendary accounts, and history and genealogy, and all these sorts of things. So when we move to Genesis, Genesis in Hebrew is called Bereshit. And it has the titles that we know these books by: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. These come from the Greek Bible, the Septuagint, that we've talked about in previous videos. But the Hebrew titles are a little bit different, and that'll be important later on when we get to some of the others. But Genesis is the only one that has the same title in Hebrew as it does in Greek. Greek, Genesis is how it would be pronounced. But this tells the story of the creation of the world to the death of Joseph in Egypt, in the outside of the Promised Land, and even before oppression by the Egyptians really begins, and has themes of saying how the God of Israel is the only God. And in some other videos we've talked about how the development of theology, development of Israel's understanding of God has changed, or did change over the course of the centuries. But by the time the first 5 books, and in particular Genesis, came together in its final form, the idea that God was the only God was pretty well cemented in Israel's thought and life. Moving on into Exodus, we see in the latter parts of Genesis how Joseph was brought to Egypt through the jealousy of his brothers. But when he reconciles to his brothers, he says, "You intended this for evil, but God intended it for good, to save many people." We see that Exodus begins with a new Pharaoh that had come over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And the Hebrews had grown so numerous for the Egyptians that they began to be a threat. So they turned toward them in harshness, made them slaves, made them build these storied cities and all of these things. And then God takes the order given to kill all of the Hebrew male babies, but one of them in particular is saved. And we've seen the idea before of an important baby who's saved from death by being put into a basket and set floating on the river. This is what happened with Moses. Moses is brought up as an Egyptian, but his Hebrew identity, his Hebrew ethnicity is still pretty strong for him. So God calls Moses to be the great liberator, the one who will bring freedom to his people. And so this is the very beginning of the notion of covenant in the Old Testament, which is a very important theological idea. The covenants in the ancient world were sometimes done between a superior power and an inferior power. And the superior power would often create some kind of deliverance, end civil war, or bring economic prosperity to the nation, or something like that. And as a result, as a response, the inferior power was to do certain things in order to maintain the favor of the superior king. And this is what's happening in the book of Exodus. God liberates the people. God brings the people out of Egypt before he gives them any laws. And we can just illustrate this with something like the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. It says that, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Therefore, you shall have no other gods before me." And of course, whenever we see a therefore, we always ask what it's there for. Or, in other words, what's before the therefore? And what's before the therefore in this case is that God already has delivered the people. The people didn't have to be faithful to God, or make the sacrifices, or not have any graven images, or not take the Lord's name in vain, or honor their father and mother, or keep the Sabbath day, or all of these other things, and then God would deliver them. Oh no. They're not earning God's salvation, but God gives them salvation and rescue first. So this brings the first part of this video about the Pentateuch to a conclusion when we're talking about Genesis and Exodus. And in the next part of the video, we'll be talking about the other 3 books of the Torah, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy.